My name is Sidin Vadukut. I'm the author of a book that released in May 2014 called The Sceptical Patriot. The book is a collection of essays that evaluate certain notions of Indian historical greatness. So every year during Independence Day or Republic Day, I'd get these WhatsApp messages saying, be proud you're Indian because India discovered the zero, plastic surgery was invented in India, and so on. So a couple of years ago, I decided to actually sit down and fact check a bunch of these to see how many of them are true. Now, by themselves, it's an easy exercise. I could just give you a list, say, did India invent the zero? Yes, no. Did India invent plastic surgery? Yes or no. But I realized when I was researching these things that there were supremely interesting backstories either about where these myths come from, or do they come from reality at all, and so on. So the book is really a collection of around 8 or 9 of these myths, and then I also fact check a bunch of famous quotes about India by so-called famous people. And yeah, it's a digression-full, meandering look at Indian history. So it's a short book. I've been told it's an interesting book. So I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, that's a good question. Because when I started writing the book, I also thought that I would end with violent yeses or violent nos. That was my initial idea. And then my wife told me, look, why don't we approach it from first principles? Let's approach this from the perspective that we don't know anything. And we'll start literally saying, did India invent the zero? We'll start with the question, what is the zero, where did it come from? And then we'll see where India figures into it. I thought the backstories were interesting, and there was more value than in just saying a yes or no, because most of these backstories have intimately to do with Indian history. They tell you not just about Indian history, about where we come from and how we are the way we are today, but they also tell us how we came to know about Indian history, which is something that a lot of people don't think about. How do we know, for example, that Ashoka was this king who was first a very martial king and then becomes... How do we know this? Where does this information come from? Because one of the things that I discovered was that till very late in the 1800s, we didn't know that Ashoka was a real person or not. It was something that everyone thought that he was a quasi-mythical figure that was probably more folklore than reality, until they actually translated 2 lines outside a stupa, I think in Sanchi, if I remember correctly, or could be Sarnath. And that's how, overnight Ashoka went from being a mythical character to actually a figment of an element in Indian history. So for me, all these stories were interesting. And the reason why, like you said, the reason why I think you need to approach these from a skeptical perspective is there is both global skepticism, in the sense that we get a lot of Indian history shoved down our throats without any particular validation of it. And there is a tendency for us, especially we are both extremely optimistic and extremely pessimistic about India, all of us. You see very good news, you jump for it and say this is true. You see very bad news, we jump for it and say this is also true. So there is no middle ground. That's one thing. More specifically, I was looking at history and the skepticism in Indian history because of the way it is taught to us. If today you wanted to go out and read an interesting little book on, say, the history of Bangalore or Karnataka, you would struggle. Or if you wanted to go out and look at a book on, let's say, a biography of Sushruta or Charaka or Dhanvantri, or, any of these, you would struggle because there just hasn't been enough interest or enough accessible popular scholarship on vast swathes of Indian history. And if you did find anything, there'd be these big doorstoppers of books, and then you'll have to find one little chapter and then cross-reference and so on. And that's because we are not taught skepticism in school. In school, you're said, look, you study this, you write it in an exam, you pass. You question this, you don't clear the exam, your future is ruined. So those are the options given to you. So I said, you know what, I don't want to, I'm not confrontational. This was my first thing when I wrote the book. I'm not going to confront people, I'm not going to call people idiots because they believe X and not Y or whatever. I said, let's forget all, why be confrontational? The reason, even in politics, the reason why I think sometimes, like you said, there's violent yes, violent no's, and there's no meeting in the middle, is because both sides take such confrontational stance. So I thought, let me write a benign, little, happy little book on Indian history, which will take us wherever the data takes me, and we'll see what happens. And one thing I say throughout the book, there are 120 odd references in the book, and then within them more references, maybe a couple of 100 references in total. What I tell people is, if you disagree with me, I'm perfectly happy. I don't mind being wrong in this book. You have the references, you can arrive at your own conclusions. So the nicest thing that has happened is the number of people who've read the book, disagree with my conclusions, and send me happy emails about it. For me, that is a validation. And my big hope is that, I'm not saying that I want to be the pathbreaker for popular non-fiction in India, but I'm really hoping more people pick up large or small topics. We really still don't have a really nuanced understanding of the history of our languages. Yesterday I was listening to somebody talk about the Brahmin migrations in India. I'd never even heard of this. I didn't know why Dvivedis are in one area or also in our area, but not in between. Why are there Trivedis? Why do the Trivedis not like the Pants? Is there a historical background to it? It's amazing. There's just so much we don't know. And we can only know it It's my idea. You can only know it if you approach it from a reasonably skeptical perspective. Very difficult. I mean, it's all relative fact if you think about it. Because I'm almost certainly, India is kind of under archaeologified, if you know what I mean. I remember a couple of years ago, I was trying to do a story about the number of live digs in India. And somebody at ASI told me, look, one, there aren't that many because there aren't that many funding opportunities. And second, oddly enough, in India, you can't really dig in the monsoon season. So you can only dig in non-monsoon season. And then you have to make sure that enough scholars are available and so on and so forth. I'm almost certain that if we were to approach just first principles archaeology in a more muscular fashion, a lot of our notions of Indian history will change, sometimes drastically. I mean, as recently as last year, and I mentioned this in the book, they discovered this new project, I think in Lumbini. There's a bunch of archaeologists working on a Buddhist temple site. And they've almost certainly redated the life of Buddha. And the problem with redating the life of Buddha is a lot of Indian history is dated from the life of Buddha. So now all of that has to be redated if you're going to correct itself and so on. It's also very difficult. I mean, like you said, a lot of it is received. We also tend to forget that there was tremendous criticism and mutual disagreement about Indian history in the 18th century. It's not like there was a British guy who was finding something, publishing in Vienna and not facing criticism. He was facing a lot of pushback. They were extremely wary of forged manuscripts coming from India. It was a huge problem. In my book, I make a very quick reference to how a bunch of these German Indologists, Germany was really the heart of Indology in that period. They were constantly being hit by fake manuscripts from, especially from China and kind of the Guptan and Mauryan man. They're completely always inundated by fake manuscripts. So there was kind of a self-correction mechanism happening even there. What really happens is, unfortunately, when it's always second-order scholarship that really corrupts it, in my view. I think a lot of the first-order guys who climbed inside temples in Tamil Nadu as the temple was falling around them, like Indiana Jones quickly scribbling down, they genuinely cared for what it meant and what it read and so on. It's very sophisticated. But as then you have the guys sitting back in London who want to read big narratives about India. They are the guys who then start telling the story in the way they want to. They want to bring in why the virtue of Christianity and why without Christianity and paganism and so on. There's a lot of sore feeling about it even to this day. A lot of people carry very open sores about how Indian history has been depicted in the West. Many of the writers here are quite unhappy about kind of the Western dominance. In a way, it's not even Western dominance. It's dead Western people's dominance. It's dead English and German people telling us what we should think about India. It will not change with us screaming at each other. It is also not going to change by changing school textbooks. It will only change if we start grappling with our history firsthand. It will only change if smart people in India decide that they want to become smart historians. It will only change if every state in India has 30 archaeological digs sufficiently manned with eager people who do not care what they will find. If you are going to go saying, I will only appreciate this dig if it vindicates that the Mahabharata was real or the Ramayana was real, we are doing it wrong. Let's go and find out what is there, Like the big archaeological dig in Kerala right now is the one at Muziris, which is the great famed ancient port of Kerala. Unbelievable. I mean, they're literally rewriting Kerala history as we sit here. It has to be done continuously. There is no reason why India could have been such an amazing place for historical research in the 18th and the 19th centuries, but suddenly it's difficult in the 20th, 21st. Makes no sense to me. And also what I discovered in writing the book, I'm not trying to promote the book, I'm telling you my experience, is there hasn't been enough work to interconnect stories. Like for example, if you look at the plastic surgery story, the traditional thing is India discovered plastic surgery, West rediscovered it because of us, yay. But that is again not true. I mean, how did it reach the West? Because a lot of Indian knowledge was carried to the West by various people. There's a chain that carried it there. What was part of the chain? Who did the translations? What did the translations do to these things? Were there branches of it which went to Italy instead of going to England, or did it go? I could go all day. I could literally sit here and talk about it all day. All we need, most of all, what we need is an enthusiastic, a happy and non-confrontational approach to understanding who we are. That is the first step. Unless, unfortunately, there is still this tendency to rush towards the messenger. When I wrote the book, a lot of people said we will not read it because it's going to be a typical NRI bashing book. This is before they knew the title, the synopsis, anything. They decided that if an Indian in London is writing Indian history, it has to be derogatory to India. Immediate. That has to stop. This messenger business doesn't matter. People say, oh my God, Marxist history, horrible. Yes, but it's not wrong. It is a Marxist interpretation of reasonably axiomatic ideas of Indian history. It's a biased view of history, but bias is not wrong by definition. So right and non-biased, the idea is to then counter it with another viewpoint. And what is amazing is that in saying this is Marxist history and this is non-Marxist history. One, we underestimate the diversity within Marxist history. We assume that like people say, oh, Aryan invasion theory, that's what everybody thinks. But there is tremendous diversity of viewpoints within the Aryan invasion side. There is the migration theory, invasion theory, trickle down, there's so many theories there. Within the non-Aryan invasion, there is a lot of diversity there also. There's so much stuff that in our eagerness to split into violent yes and violent no, we've just completely pasted over. Now, I'm not a historian. I'm somebody who picked it up out of personal interest. And for me, it took me 8 to 12 months to figure out amazing aspects of Indian history. Now, imagine if more scholars did that. As you can see, I feel very passionately about it. So, it's just amazing. Oh, access to archives. Almost definitely access to resources. I mean, I can tell you right now, if I had to write a book on Indian history, I would want to be based in London and not in India, at least for the large part of the initial research. The British Library, just to give you some idea, the British Library has, I think, the world's second largest collection of Malayalam books, which is bizarre when you think about it. You would assume first, second, third, all of them should be in Kerala, not in London, number one. Or number two, I was at a private library in London. I said, do you have anything on the Nehru Report of 1932, I think. They said, what? Anything. We have a first edition copy of the Nehru Report published by the Indian National Congress, copy lying in our library. Nobody's checked it out in 40 years, but we have a copy. Because they have, and even if you go to the National Archives in Delhi, they will tell you how up till the Republic Day, literally, every copy, one copy of everything was sent to London, but they have meticulously kept it for easy access. On the other hand, if you have to go to the National Archives and get something, you'd probably spend a little bit of time getting it. Last year I was reading an article which said that lakhs of Sanskrit manuscripts are trashed each year in India because there is no way to preserve them. We have no idea if there's a first copy Sushruta Samhita there because nobody's ever got a first copy. Who knows if it's there or not there or whatever. So that's why, I mean, I can understand why they would be there. I enjoy English facilities myself for a large part of my research. It's just so easy. The Americans, they've gone even one step further. They've scanned everything they have and put it up on the internet. Obviously, it behooves me then to double check and make sure the scanning is correct and it's not a corrupted copy and so on. It's very easy. That by itself should not undermine, but what will happen is, from my perspective, from my limited scholarship, what will happen when we depend so much on our scholars sitting in foreign libraries is then there is nobody at the coalface of history here, digging away and, you know, there's that not a lot of that happening. We've literally kind of core competency-fied that act. So there are poor historians in India finding new stuff, sending it abroad, where there are other guys who then have the luxury to sit back and the funding to analyze this. And what you said is absolutely correct, because I go to the ICHR website very often, the Indian Council of Historical Research. I'm amazed by the stuff they're doing, but that is just not in the public domain. There's this big gulf between the scholar and the lay reader. And then the lay, and ideally you want them to come together, but actually they're actually going farther and farther apart. It's not like, to just recap what I mean, it's not bad that they're working there, but you wish some of them were working in first principles here. In a sense, it's exactly like what's happening in sciences in India because of Indian policy. You've got the smart guys working in the IITs and the engineers and so on working there, and the government laboratories are in entirely different cities doing research for actual projects separately. And these two guys almost never, which is bizarre, unlike the American model where you've got the laboratory across the road from the engineering college and so on. That is the gap, and it's not just in history or science, it's in many areas of Indian, you know, you've got smart guys working on agribusiness in IIM Ahmedabad, but the guys who actually do agribusiness for the government are from an entirely different domain or universe of people. You need to bring all of them together. Same problem, it's not unique to history, is what I'm saying. It's, our smartest people are not solving our toughest problems, you know, so it's a problem. No, I hope people read it without expecting history to vindicate your political positions, because that's very frustrating. Because what you do then, you just keep on, you ignore sources till you find the one source that perfectly validates your political position. So don't do that. Read the book to enjoy it. If you disagree, I'm fine. I'm fine being wrong. I dislike being insincere. That's my personal position. There are lots of sources in it, and if you like the book, dislike the book, you want the sources, send me email. I've got hundreds, literally hundreds of free online scanned books by all kinds of interesting people on all aspects of Indian history. I rue, in a somewhat metaphysical way, I rue the fact that I will never live long enough to read all the Indian history I want to. But if all of us get together, maybe, we can start at doing it.